You can now get a 30-day trial to experience The Athletic for free. Visit the link in the description below to try it now.
Hello, welcome to Tifo IRL. We're going to talk about Ralf Rangnick. I think I said his name right. He works for Manchester United, doesn't he, Adam Crafton?
He does, well, over the last few months at least, and for a few more months.
And he replaced Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, didn't he, Carl Anka?
That he did.
Look at my esteemed friends here. Lovely. So we're going to talk about Rangnick, why United brought him in, how it's going for him so far, whether it's going to work, whether the tactics work, because we like tactics, and then look at some problems that still maybe need fixed and what the long-term kind of future is. But first, I would like to know, Adam Crafton, why did they bring Ralf Rangnick in?
They brought him in because they'd sacked Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and they needed someone. They decided they wanted someone until the end of the season. Rather than going, let's go and get the person we really want in the middle of the season, they said, we want someone to tide us over until the end.
Who do they really want?
I think we're going to get onto that a bit later, aren't we?
Teasers, yes.
Spoilers.
But I think that the sense was, here's someone with experience who can also not only shape the team, but also help shape the club a little bit, which is why he's not only got a contract till the end of this season, he's also got a 2-year consultancy agreement in which the club can use his expertise. It was a slightly odd appointment in that I think he'd only managed for 2 of the last 10 years, which is, quite a surprising thing to see from a manager of I suppose what you'd call one of the Super League clubs. So it was all a bit odd, but the idea was he comes in, steadies the ship, gets the club playing with some sort of identity again, and then sails off again into a sort of boardroom role.
And he came, he's got a really good legacy background, right? Tell me more about that.
So he's regarded as the godfather of Gegenpressing or the godfather of German football. Rangnick wasn't necessarily the most successful playing career or coaching career.
He's not won very much, is he?
But no, he is not. But at a time when German football was very much still playing with a sweeper, he opted for a system 4 at the back, does an infamous, notorious, however you want to describe it, television segment where he explains his methodology. So this is very straight. It's like quite a Cruyffian thing to do.
Yeah.
Go on television and go, right, this is how football needs to work.
That's what it reminds me of, this whole thing. It's very much like that, yeah.
Yep. Various people in German football go, this man is a nerd. And not in the good way, but you're a nerd. Would you know?
Nerds are cool now, but they weren't then.
It depends on the nerd.
But let's not kill the Tifo audience.
Indeed.
In one go.
Yeah. Indeed. Nerds are great. But he's dismissed as a nerd, and it doesn't. He's in and around the footballing sphere, and he's influential to a number of coaches and figures we know in German football, including Jurgen Klopp, including Thomas Tuchel, whatnot. In terms of management, his biggest success, I'd say, is probably his stint at RB Leipzig, where Rasenballsport Leipzig are in their Bundesliga 2 season. He is their manager, helps get them promoted. And then Ralf Hasenhüttl, now Southampton manager, becomes the manager in their debut season in the Bundesliga. They finished second, so Hasenhüttl was the manager, Ralf Rangnick is the sporting director. They have a very, very close relationship during the time at Leipzig. Hasenhüttl was another season in charge. I believe they finished sixth place. They have a bust up because Rangnick very much wants to continue this Gegenpressing style of football, whereas Hasenhüttl is, by the second season, wanting to do something a little bit more progressive, a little bit different, and less RB flavoured. Rangnick's like, no, stick to the team project, all the massive team project. They have a dispute, some way in between the dispute, depending on who you talk to. Rangnick's like, all right, I'll find a replacement. The replacement eventually become Nagelsmann. Hasenhüttl leaves at the end of the season because he said he doesn't want to get involved in all that. And Rangnick goes, all right then, I'll manage them for one more season. Wait until Nagelsmann comes over. So he has 2 seasons in charge of RB Leipzig. And after basically doing the season after Hasenhüttl departs, he doesn't manage a football club until now.
Yes, because he then went and was not a manager at other clubs, including one in Russia, whose name...
He was at Lokomotiv Moscow as the sporting director before leaving his role to take charge of Manchester United. His reputation at Lokomotiv is sticky.
Yeah,
it's not the best.
Well, he's at United now, and this is the thing, so it made sense, right? So if German football is really heavily influencing, especially in the Premier League, you look at Hasenhüttl, he's mentioned, Tuchel, Klopp, it's kind of everywhere, right? It's more, when you think about how football's changed from being the Guardiola tippy-tap passing and control of everything, now it's very direct and transitional and vertical football, I would say. So if United's identity is tied around a lot of this attack kind of football, that makes sense. You bring in the guy who is the guy who engineered all the way of this playing. I wonder whether it's maybe a little bit too late.
It was an esoteric choice. So I do remember sometime last year when I was constantly yelling, when are Manchester United going to get a director of football? I would really like them to get a director of football. They've promised a director of football ever since they fired Mr. Mourinho. I believe I said something along the lines of, this will never happen, but it'd be really fun if they got Ralf Rangnick as the director of football, because I just believe Rangnick was simply too combustible to exist in the Manchester United ecosystem. I think now he's the manager. Best case scenario, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, is the methods take, they finish top 4, he goes upstairs and they all listen to him in the consultancy role. The worst case scenario is his methods are a bit too weird for the squad, they don't finish in top 4, it ends up a bit like Louis van Gaal season 2, and when he goes up into consultancy role, everyone's like, well, no, you weren't a good manager, so I'm not going to pay attention to you.
Well, this is a perfect segue into chapter 2, which is what was the first thing or things that Rangnick actually did when he came in? So when he came into the door, what was the very first thing as a manager that he did at United?
I think the first things he did was he changed the system. He went to this 4-2-2-2, which probably, I mean, Carl will know better, but very similar to what Southampton seemed to be trying to do over recent years. So he had this idea, it was all a bit more direct, a bit more, he calls it vertical, which I think is basically just playing ball forward. And
we'll come to that in a minute as well, yes.
And a lot of it was, it was stuff that football fans, particularly English football fans, like to hear. It didn't seem that revolutionary. Really what he was saying wasn't so different to what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer would have said. Work hard for each other, respect the shirt. It was interesting even, in all the profiles that were written about him before he came, you saw him start talking about like his view on tattoos, for example, and the fact he doesn't really like tattoos and he doesn't really like players who have individual goal celebrations, which inevitably makes you think, oh, he's going to get on great with Cristiano Ronaldo. But Ronaldo doesn't have tattoos, so there you go. So he's quite old-fashioned despite being a moderniser and an innovator from a club building point of view. And then there was, I think one of the interesting things is his press conferences are incredibly direct. the amount of journalists you will see who will just tell you he speaks well, he talks well, doesn't he, Ralf Rangnick? And he does.
What sort of things does he say?
I think journalists like him because he's probably a little bit too honest.
He's very candid. He's very German in his directness and candidness.
And you think you're catching him out almost, he's giving too much to you? Or?
Yes, it's that sort of moment where you bump into an old friend in the street and go, oh, how are you doing? And then he proceeds to tell you how their entire weekend was doing. Like, oh, that was no, I gave you that as a brief formality.
Yeah, but as an example, he was asked about Paul Pogba, who hadn't played for quite a while, and he starts talking about, he says, in future I'd actually rather him do his recuperation at Manchester United's training ground rather than, I think, where Pogba was doing it in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Or you could ask about, he was asked about Anthony Martial last week after they draw against Aston Villa, and a lot of managers, and I think, so, to be fair to Solskjaer, I think that was probably one of his, what players considered his strengths. He would shield players from those kind of moments, and Rangnick just said, Martial didn't really fancy it today, and he didn't come. So there's been a candidness, I think, with talking about the players, talking about Jadon Sancho in terms of, maybe there's some psychological issues in terms of adapting to Manchester United. Again, not something that you would necessarily expect to hear from maybe Klopp or Guardiola, Gareth Southgate. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but I think it explains why journalists quite like him, because he's giving us headlines.
Yeah, it's very different to what you tend to get from, not that he's not an elite manager, but that sort of group who think of that as another weapon in how they manage, I suppose. And actually, on that note, how did the players react when he was announced when he came in? Because some of the noises seem to imply that they weren't entirely sure, which I think is absolutely acceptable for like a 24-year-old who doesn't really care that much about football as some of the nerds do.
There was a story on, I think it was ESPN, Mark Ogden said, some players had to Google who Ralf Rangnick was, which some people got very angry about, because people get angry about everything. But it was also, we knew who he was, but we still had to Google quite a bit in terms of to find out more about who this guy is and where he's from and what his background is. And it's only reasonable that players they go and play, they train. They're not all students of German football. The guy's not been at the top of European football for the past 10 years that they'll have seen on, like a Carlo Ancelotti or even a Nagelsmann, someone that they've seen on the touchline in Champions League nights. So I think it was a little bit like, all right, let's see what he's got.
Do you think it matters? Like the players, would he not have the level of authority some other managers might not get?
I think a lot of who Rangnick is tied to the style of football he wants to play. So the pressing system he wants very much requires collective. You have to put the collective ahead of the individual, and you have to essentially buy into his tactical scheme. Yeah. And it's a lot easier to buy into someone's tactical scheme if they go, well, if you're Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, do what I tell you. Why? Well, there's a photo of me up outside the dressing room. I'll help want to win a Champions League. Whereas if you Rangnick, do what I tell you. Why? I was really important thanks to this TV appearance, and all these people listen to me. It has a little less weight, especially when you're not in German football as well.
He's TV famous. He's not pub famous.
There you go.
Well, I'll do. Well, I'm going to look at his record, right? Because I'm going to go to the lovely tactics board thing. Because this is what Rangnick's done since he's come in. Look at the table. Isn't it nice? 60% win rate. That's better.
Solid.
It's good.
Solid.
It is only, 10 games? Mm-hmm. So it's far too early to draw any conclusions of how it's going to work, obviously, and the whole point is he's meant to be a consultant.
But easy games on paper.
Yeah. I mean, Newcastle, Norwich, Burnley. Yeah.
I mean, if you could pick 10 games to play, it'd be not far off that.
I think you're absolutely right there. I hadn't even thought of that, so that's interesting. Here's his thing compared to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. An immediate improvement. Look at this. So obviously that is good. There's problems that Solskjaer inherited loads of things. I mean, Ronaldo's one sort of issue, I think, on its own, and he kind of solves a lot of problems that he also creates. We've covered that before. The thing that Rangnick has definitely done is improve their defensive structure. Mm-hmm. So they were just shipping in goals like there were punctures all over the hull. Now that is completely changed. They have been playing bad teams.
And the big difference compared to the last 6 or 7 games of Solskjaer is Rafael Varane's played.
Yes.
And I think if he would have been available for the last 6 weeks of Solskjaer's reign, that might have ended very differently.
Well, let's look at how they actually play. So, again, I think Carl will be better at this than me. Do you want to come up and go through it? So, this 4-2-2-2 is the kind of thing that Rangnick has used a lot. So in Germany and things like that, it's a 4-4-2 kind of out of possession. So when they're defending high at the pitch, you might have it like this. But it allows your forwards show the ball wide, so that you can then create little pressing traps. So over here, and they can close in.
The most common one you'd have is opposition goal kick or short build-up. You want your initial strikers to occupy centre-back, so to try and disrupt this easy pass. Or if the centre-back does get the ball, you essentially want one of your centre-backs to try and disrupt this passing lane as well. Just basically disrupt all these passing lanes from the opposition. Create double teams out wide and whatnot, which basically would create situations where your centre-back needs to pass into central areas. Your double pivots, double sixes, basically then create situations where they can turn the ball over quite easily, pass the ball to the strikers back, and then you get your goals quite simply.
And the theory behind this is just the closer you are to winning the ball to the goal when you win the ball, the shorter the distance to score a goal.
Yeah, exactly. And it's further away from your own goal as well. The other thing with it as well, I mean, the really important things in the football system, width and depth. So you want to have your depth is from your striker to your defender, and your width is obviously the two sides of this pitch here. But when you're playing this kind of 4-4-2 shape, or 4-2-2-2, what's meant to happen is you're meant to swap and rotate positions, but it becomes quite clustered and narrow, which then means you're relying a lot on your fullbacks to come up. Mm-hmm. And if you've got players like Wan-Bissaka, who I'd say is not having a great season, Shaw's been injured, Alex Telles has come in, you're limited because a lot of your width and wide play is going to come from these positions, and United aren't really strong here at the moment. It's also the players they have suit playing in a 4-2-3-1, which is what he seems to have now.
Partially. So the games against Crystal Palace 4-2-2-2, he even mentioned the wide players and number 10s, which is again a very Rangnick / Hasenhüttl style methodology. So they very much pinch inwards the wide players. So that was the first 2 games.
Like that,
and then it doesn't quite work. While it definitely worked in terms of limiting shots on goal to an extent, it was great in terms of chance creation. So the idea of the 4-2-2-2 is essentially you shorten the distance to the goal, and it helps with essentially getting not the most creative attackers to not have to do too much hard work to get goals. What it seemed to have done was essentially dishearten the formerly slightly more freestyle attacking tendencies of someone like Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah.
So they changed a little bit to a more direct 4-4-2 against, I want to say, Newcastle.
I think Burnley first, wasn't it? It was Burnley, because they played poorly against Newcastle, then changes it against Burnley, then also plays it against Wolves. This sort of really, pretty much an old-fashioned 4-4-2. And it was a disaster, to be blunt, against, I mean, Wolves, it was like, you know, that old problem that they had at the start of the season where they have this big gap in between the midfield and the defence, loads of space, loads of shots on goal against them, and barely any shots themselves. So it was like the worst of all worlds at that point.
Speaking of shots from long distance, this is from the last game that happened before we recorded this, was against West Ham. This is the shot map from United, and the problem they have is they're taking lots of shots from long range and really low value XG positions. So the goal is Rashford's, which is the only shot inside the 6-yard area, which is what you want. And you might have, like, you know, in Football Manager, you have the work ball into box kind of thing. It's important, but you need width to be able to do this. And what you see in a lot of the situations United against West Ham is that they're all crammed in this small little area here with no one overlapping to stretch the defence. So when there's no one either side of you, like Man City do this, they pull the wingers really high and wide. This guy now needs to worry about what's happening, because that's an easy switch to this guy who can then get in to this position and put the ball into the box. So the fullback's got to worry about this guy, which creates a little bit of space, a little bit more, and then this guy has to move across to make sure the spacing is better. This guy again is worried about this guy on the right here. So it just means there's a little bit more space. And even though the wingers in certain systems like Guardiola's won't get the ball, it frees up more room for these forward passes. And we're talking about vertical play. Like, these are vertical passes that you want to be able to get into these sorts of players. And you need that with the width, which United haven't really had under Rangnick's 4-2-2-2 thing. But the 4-2-3-1, I mean, Greenwood and Elanga were coming inside against West Ham quite a lot still.
Yes.
But then it's the overlap in fullback. Is it going to work?
So the interesting thing was, again, prior to their game against Brentford, Rangnick essentially said that the method now is going to be 4-3-3. Which,
how's that look?
It was 4-3-3 with McTominay as your 6, Fred as your left-sided player because he's left-footed, and Bruno Fernandes was on the right. This was interesting. McTominay's a player who, I am of the personal belief, is probably best as an attacking box-to-box midfielder.
I 100%
more
agree,
of an 8 rather than a 6. But he seemed to work better as a 6 against Brentford, although United did still get cut up a lot on the attacking transition, especially from their own corners as well. McTominay seems better in this role right now because I think the passing distances are shorter for him to make, and also he's scanning more, he's looking left and right more. His positioning has always been sort of his weakness part of his game in terms of cover shadow, which I think you've talked about as well, but I think he's just surrounded by 2 more players here. Fernandes on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
I think he probably prefers to play on the left due to just the quality of the attacking players United have on the left, but he's often more needed on the right-hand side. This is to do with the fact that obviously McTominay does tend to play on the right a little bit more, and Wan-Bissaka for a long periods of time was the starting right back. But if it's Wan-Bissaka out, and where is he?
There he is.
Mr. Dallo here, that can work. And then of course, I mean, the starting lineup against West Ham looked like a 4-2-3-1.
So on that note, the player that's just been promoted to the first team really is Anthony Elanga. This is statistics from FB Ref. So if you put him versus Jadon Sancho, right? Sancho we obviously know is great in Germany, he's a good player. The green bits are where he's better than Elanga, but the key things is where Elanga is better than Sancho in terms of the performance per 90, which is all the defensive stuff. So when we're looking at how Rangnick wants his players to play, it's very much based on work ethic and work rate and where you're going to pressure, where you're going to win the ball back, because that's how you are able to create chances and help defend from the front. And Elanga is just much, much better than Jadon Sancho. And if you look at Mason Greenwood, exactly the same sort of problem. So yes, he gives you an awful lot, but for the good of the system, what you really want is these things to be better, which is why he's getting in the team over some big money lads.
I think it's also because Anthony Elanga is a different style of player
Yes.
to all of United's current forwards. So if you look at someone like Mason Greenwood, you look at someone like Marcus Rashford, someone even like Cristiano Ronaldo and Anthony Martial, they're all strikers that primarily want the ball played to feet. And while some of those players perhaps could be improved if they tried running behind a bit more.
Or at all.
Yeah. None of those players run in behind with the sort of consistency required to constantly break down low blocks. So, whereas Anthony Elanga very much seems to go, you know what, I don't necessarily need the ball to feet. I'm going to run in behind, as evidenced with his goal against Brentford.
Yes, lovely. That brings us nicely on to problems that still need to be fixed. Like, Ronaldo seems to be losing his mind after games and
during games.
And during
times,
games.
yeah.
So what's going on there? There was an interview that he did where he effectively called out certain players who no one knows who they could possibly be. Tell me the story, Adam.
So he's been frustrated almost since he arrived at the club. He has a fantastic debut against Newcastle, scores 2 goals, and then the next game they go to Young Boys in the Champions League. He scores, he's done his job as far as he's concerned. Then Wan-Bissaka's sent off, United self-destruct, lose the game, and he spends the last 10 minutes of that game basically in the dugout, with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Bruno Fernandes. And I remember after that game, I think it was Rio Ferdinand was saying, Solskjaer needs to clamp down on that, and Solskjaer said it's not such a big deal, but it's still, you wouldn't see it, I don't think, at Liverpool or Manchester City or even with Carlo Ancelotti, managers such as that, in the dugout. Then the results start to turn. They lose at home to Aston Villa. Bruno Fernandes takes the penalty instead of Cristiano Ronaldo. Emi Martinez in the Aston Villa goal is teasing Fernandes, saying Ronaldo should be taking it. Fernandes misses it. Then you have the next game against Everton at home, where they choose to rest Ronaldo, which wasn't so irrational. They'd had a Champions League game midweek, but it all becomes a big story because Sir Alex Ferguson talks to
Khabib,
the
UFC champ. Well, former UFC champion, now retired, regarded as one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time. But anyway.
Thank you. And it becomes a big thing, how can you not play your best players? And everyone's magnifying this Ferguson side of it. And then they lose games dramatically, whether it's Watford or Liverpool, Manchester City. And a lot of it becomes, can you create a winning team with a 36-year-old, 37-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo? And at the moment, you can create a team that can win 1-0 against West Ham and Norwich and whatever. And to be fair, he has come up with 4 goals, I think, after 78 minutes in 4 different Champions League games.
Yeah, big goals he scores.
Huge goals. The goal against Tottenham that opens the scoring, that keeps Solskjaer in a job for another week, 2 at Atlanta. On an individual level, it's hard to argue he's having a terrible season, but it's also very difficult to argue that he is having a tremendous impact in terms of, if you take the barometer of his signing to be, you want to turn Manchester United from the team that finished second and was in a European final to a team that finishes first and can win big European games in the knockout stages. It's hard to argue at the moment that that's working.
Well, is it because the players around him aren't good enough? Is he right to call out the younger players?
Yeah, I think so.
It's a confusing one there's that old Game of Thrones thing of just because you're right doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right thing.
What episode is that?
Not Littlefinger. Your man Tyrion says that to Jon Snow.
This is the nerdy show, yeah.
We're big nerds. I think the big thing with Cristiano Ronaldo is at his pronounced age and slight physical decline, while he is still a good player and still very good at certain actions on the field.
Which he would regret. He would challenge that.
He's still a slight physical decline.
Yeah, I think.
Which is interesting. He said genetically he now believes he believes he's 30, which is fine, but I think everyone should know he's not as fast as what he was 10 years ago. He was never the most creative dribbler, and I think his dribbling has got slightly worse in the years, so he can still beat you over 5 yards, but if it's beat a player over 10 yards, that's perhaps not going to happen. So Ronaldo himself is in this very strange state where, while he's still good at some actions, he probably could do better by doing less. So he still very much likes, even though he's at his pronounced age, you probably should just be working in the 6-yard area and just being a penalty box poacher. He's playing a lot out on the left.
Yeah, but the problem with that is for him to be a penalty box poacher, United would have to keep the ball in the opponent's half of the pitch consistently and regularly and sustain attacks. And they don't do that as a team. So I have some sympathy with him there. I think to go back to your point where you're saying about these young players and the interview he
his
gave.
His influence on them and stuff, His
influence. I think most people I've spoken to at Manchester United would say if Mason Greenwood demonstrated greater application, he could be anything he wants to be. That doesn't mean Mason Greenwood's lazy. It doesn't mean Mason Greenwood doesn't work hard. It means if he showed the dedication that maybe a young Ronaldo did, then the ceiling is that high. And I think, that's just one example. I'm sure Ronaldo...
But that is what makes the elite players, right? It's mentality. It's that...
And Ronaldo looks, I think, at some of these players, and part of it's like, it does sound a bit like, a bit OK boomer sort of mentality of these kids, these kids don't know how easy they've got it, everything's laid out for them. But the other thing we have to remember is Ronaldo didn't come. I remember when he came and everyone was like, oh, this is going to be an education for Rashford and Greenwood and Sancho and anyone else who...
Cantona-esque was the sort of discussion, which was
he's going to nurture them. He wasn't. He was there to win. He was there because Man United finished second, went and bought Rafael Varane and Jadon Sancho, and were going to go and challenge for the title. He wasn't there for some sort of development project where he's going to handhold for 2 years and leave Mason Greenwood in a far better place. He couldn't care less.
Right? Yeah, that's sort of what he's walked into, right? But
it wasn't the plan.
Well, no, but then now he is in a development plan.
Yeah.
Because what happens next at United, Rangnick's the guy in charge of it all, right? Is he going to be the long-term manager? It doesn't look like it. No.
No, he says his priority now is to essentially win as many games as possible between now and the end of the season, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I still think, if he was to finish third and take United to the Champions League semi-finals, I think that discussion would change. But at the moment, they're looking at other people like Mauricio Pochettino, Ten Hag at Ajax.
Still Pochettino.
Still
Pochettino. With this guy.
Yeah. Pochettino, I think, would be probably top of that at the moment. Ten Hag, Julian Lopetegui, and someone else. Luis Enrique.
Is Valverde still on that list? I know he was the list for the initial.
Yeah, he was in the list for the interim with other people like Rudy Garcia. I don't think he would be as a long-term solution. I think the challenge United have is how do you properly develop these conversations if you've got Pochettino at PSG, Ten Hag at Ajax, Lopetegui at Sevilla, all doing quite important jobs of their own.
For sure.
And how do you not destabilise that? And then when you're working on summer transfer targets, how can you be honest and transparent about what they're coming to?
That's it. And if Rangnick's in charge of the players going to bring in, I think he had a big say in how especially Leipzig developed the players they took in and stuff like that. That's whoever they choose is going to have to work under that model with Rangnick, right?
Possibly. So the interesting thing here and the confusing thing is his role is a consultant. It's not a technical director. It's not a director of football. We don't know if he's got how much say he's got on negotiations next to someone like John Murtough as well. It is a very nebulous thing, which again creates this...
And it's whatever they want it to be, right? Yeah. It's as much or as little, and I think, to be honest, I think a lot will depend how he does. If he does, as I say, Champions League semi-finals, final, and comes third, you want to listen to him a lot more.
Yeah.
If they finish sixth and crash out against Atletico Madrid, you don't want to listen to him. That's just, as silly as it sounds, that's the way the world works in football.
It's a results business.
It's a results business.
Which you shouldn't do, but here we are. It's that weird thing.
We finished. That's it. That's our talk. Rangnick, we don't know who's going to be there at the end. We don't know who's going to get hired. We don't know anything really, so we've wasted all of your time. But thank you, Karl Anka.
It's fun. That's what we learned.
I had a great time.
Thank you.
Did you have a good time, Adam?
Loved it. Thank you for having me.
See you next time.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. There are journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.